Okay, so it looks like Politico may have accidentally leaked the fact that Joe Biden will be picking Kamala Harris for VP, or at least that's the headline. You can see this headline here from Fox News, and I'm going to show you all the original article and what was said initially in just a second here, but this is just sort of the headline talking about here how Politico accidentally reports that Biden picked Kamala Harris as his running mate. So this is really interesting news to see something like this leak. Obviously, definitely gonna inspire a lot of speculation and stuff about what's going on here. But this was the original article, and it's basically just like a stat sheet for all the different candidates, and people can look at it, etc. But this is sort of what's going on here. So this is what it looks like now if you scrolled through that article. But originally, when it was first published, it had this here. It said Biden's VP pick, and it has here this stuff here. Joe Biden chose Kamala Harris to become his running mate for the 2020 election on August 1st. Interesting that there's a specific date, blah, 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 blah. And then also here, there's a specific quote from the announcement, which is interesting here. In his announcement, Biden called Harris, quote, a worthy opponent and a worthy running mate, alluding to the pair's rivalry, blah, 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 blah. You get the point here. It seems as though Politico may have accidentally sort of showed the hands of the Biden campaign, that there may have been some inside information leaked to Politico so that they could write this up or something like this. That said, it's also possible, of course, that this is just a template, right? Because this is something that, look, if I was writing a template for something, no matter what it is, that's basically what an outline for a template would look like, right? Like, okay, Joe Biden picked Kamala Harris, and then on this date, August X, and then if you're going to pick a date and you know that it's going to happen in August, you're probably just going to pick the first, and then, they have 2 weeks out before the convention, which means you'd basically fill that in, and you'd say 1 week out before the convention, 2 weeks out, etc., and then, okay, you have a quote, and then at the end there, it mentions the rivalry, which is one of the big headlines, which let me show you all that right now, because that's one of the big debates about whether or not Kamala Harris will actually become the vice presidential pick. So this here sort of ran in Politico that Chris Dodd, who's someone who works for Joe Biden, went around and talked to Kamala Harris about the fact, you'll remember back over a year ago now at this point in the Democratic debates, Kamala Harris criticized Joe Biden on busing, and there's a question of whether or not that hurt Joe Biden's feelings, and Kamala Harris basically laughed it off and said that she had no remorse. And so a lot of people are speculating that this may hurt Joe Biden or hurt Kamala Harris's chances for VP. And so, of course, if you were writing a template, you would include that part in the template, right? So you'd have a quote, and then sort of have in the template the obstacles that she overcame in order to win it. So I actually do lean on the side that this is a template. However, I also want to clarify and I've said more or less since the beginning that Kamala Harris was the most likely VP pick. There was one exception, though, when you'll remember maybe a couple months back, there was also another Politico article leaking the fact that Amy Klobuchar was being vetted by Joe Biden's candidacy, and I said at that point that it looked like, well, maybe Amy Klobuchar is the pick. Now, of course, the George Floyd incidences transpired very shortly after that was leaked, and then Amy Klobuchar dropped out of the running. So, that's irrelevant at this point. But I've more or less been consistent in saying that I do think that Kamala Harris is the most likely pick. Now, I want to clarify when I say likely. I'm not saying that I'm cheering on for Kamala Harris. I'm not here to vote for Cop Kamala for vice president. I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a big fan of that ticket. But I did always think that Kamala Harris was the most likely pick because it's the one that the donors really like. She checks all the boxes. She definitely has the right resume for the job. It's the kind of person that Joe Biden would likely want in the position for vice president because she doesn't have like a clear ideology in many respects, right? You may think that having a clear ideology is a good thing, but oftentimes that means that you're able to run the show. You'll remember, for instance, Dick Cheney. He had a very, very clear ideology. That, and also he had been sort of working in the White House for a really long time, and so he really knew the inner mechanics of the White House, and so he was really able to run the White House in many respects behind George W. Bush's back. Now, obviously, he did that very maliciously and for very, very bad things, but that's the point here, which is that if you have a clear ideology and you kind of know how to navigate the White House, you're probably going to be able to navigate around the president. And one of the things which Joe Biden is really concerned about is having a vice presidential pick who actually kind of outshines himself, right? That's a concern for Joe Biden. And we've seen a number of names been floating around more recently, and the reason why I think that Kamala Harris is a good pick is precisely because I don't know that Kamala Harris is really going to be able to outshine Joe Biden in any substantial way. The only way where Kamala Harris will be able to outshine Joe Biden in is going to be her ability to form sentences, her ability to speak coherently, and those are precisely the things that actually he wants. He wants a ticket where, people who are maybe a little bit worried about Joe Biden's age can see, well, at least there's somebody to fall back on. Whereas, you look at other names, for instance, like Susan Rice, who has been kind of maybe an upstart shot that a lot of people are looking at for the past couple days. The thing with Susan Rice, and I do think that she is a decent shot because Joe Biden and Susan Rice have worked together for a very, very long time. But the thing with Susan Rice is she really does know how to navigate the White House quite well. She's been working there for a long, long time. And also she has a very, very clear ideology. And I do think that Joe Biden is well aware that if Susan Rice is the pick, there's going to be a lot of stories running around about how Susan Rice is really the one pulling the strings, that Susan Rice is really the one who's president and Joe Biden is the sideshow. And that's something which Joe Biden would desperately want to avoid. We've seen numerous articles talking about how Joe Biden is actually concerned about that. This isn't just something that because, he's a person, because obviously he wants to take center stage, but no, we've seen numerous articles talking about how that is a serious criterion for Joe Biden when it comes to picking the vice presidential pick. So I do think that Kamala Harris, for that reason, is a pretty solid likely pick, right? When I say solid likely pick, again, I'm not cheering for her. I just mean to say that she's the most likely pick out of the different candidates. Elizabeth Warren as a VP pick was always possible, but I ranked her as maybe second because there's two reasons here. Even though a lot of progressives aren't necessarily happy with Elizabeth Warren because of how she may have, treated Bernie Sanders in the primary, it's also the case that a lot of donors still didn't like Elizabeth Warren, and that's obviously something which Joe Biden was worried about. Joe Biden was talking to the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, who said that Elizabeth Warren would be a bad pick for him, whatever that means. It sounds like it's a half threat, half comment, right? Definitely something that sounds like a bit of a threat, oh, she's a bad pick for you. So, this is a situation where I do think that Elizabeth Warren is a less likely pick, especially after the events of George Floyd and the general mood of the country right now. It is an instance where you'll remember, for instance, Amy Klobuchar, when she was dropping out of the running for VP, did make a kind of sly remark which could be interpreted as a bit of a jab at Elizabeth Warren, oh, she needs to drop out of the VP running as well. So it's pretty interesting, and it's definitely something we're going to have to follow. But again, I do think that Kamala Harris is a very, very likely pick, even if I do think that this probably was a template thing, and they probably wrote up the template for the candidates who are most likely, especially, Kamala Harris. And also, we need to talk about this here. We saw this report come out actually earlier today, talking about how on Biden's notes when he was speaking, it said here how do not hold grudges against Kamala Harris, and it talked a little bit about some of the notes regarding Kamala Harris and some of the things that, Kamala Harris is good with, talking about how she campaigned with them, how she's talented, and that, he has great respect for her, and that he does not hold grudges against Kamala Harris. Again, the talking point that, well, there's this past sort of division between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden because of the way that Kamala Harris hit Joe Biden over a year ago on those debates. So Joe Biden is up front and center talking about how he doesn't hold grudges. And also, I do want to say, now this is maybe pushing it a little bit, but this whole note, she had no remorse thing, I wouldn't be too surprised if the reason why this story got planted actually, now again, speculation here, but I do think that it's quite possible that part of the reason why this story got planted was actually related to that very thing. Basically saying she had no remorse, that this is the narrative that Kamala Harris is going to be using moving forward. They're not going to try to do a gotcha on Kamala Harris where they try to get Kamala Harris to apologize, or at the very least, that's not going to be the strategy of Kamala Harris. They're sort of throwing that out there, right? Throwing that idea out there, is it a good strategy for Kamala Harris to run around saying that, well, I really believed what I said, blah, 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 or is it going to be a good strategy for Kamala Harris to say, well, I didn't really mean what I said, and basically they're throwing out a bone to see how the public reacts to Kamala Harris saying that she has no remorses about the criticisms that she made for Joe Biden, but that they're still ultimately friendly. So it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting thing. We're going to have to see how it unfolds. Again, at the end of the day, I don't necessarily think that this particular thing that got leaked from Politico means for certain that Kamala Harris is going to be the VP pick, or that it means for certain that someone inside Politico got inside messaging. I just think that Kamala Harris is a very, very likely pick, and so they wrote out a template in case she is finally the pick. All right, you guys, that's the video. If you liked it, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.